Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everyone. I am Matt K. Lewis, talking to Bill Scher on my left. Well, I guess it depends on how they put this thing up. I think
I
you're
think I
usually
think
on my
they
left.
put me on the left. If you're
So,
watching it visually on bloggingheads.tv, if you're a podcasting, what we're talking about makes no sense at all.
well,
Um,
I prefer, and let me just say, I prefer the podcast. I listen to Blogging Heads, not this show, but well, sometimes I listen to this show, but I listen to the other shows. I prefer the audio. I don't need to see people. I like to hear them. I'd rather. I think this show's better, like in audio format. That's just me.
Speak for yourself. I know my fans want to see my pretty face as much as possible. So
Yes.
maybe just cover the right part of the screen there. Just look at me. Um, so we are a few days after the Orlando massacre. Um, and I feel like before this, I mean, this is a political show. We're going to talk politics. Sorry to be so emotionally detached, but that is what we do here. Um, we talked before. People have said beforehand that if there was a terrorist attack during the campaign, that would probably help Trump because he's the nationalist. He's maybe a foreign policy isolationist in some respects, but not when it comes to terrorism and ISIS. He would play up all his anti-Muslim bigotry, anti-immigrant bigotry, and it would play into his hands. Uh, and even in the polls that I have seen, he actually polls better when asked who do you trust on terrorism more, although she polls better on who do you trust in an international crisis. So it sort of depends on how you frame the question. But I would argue, at least pundit wise, and in some early polling data, though I think we'd have to wait a few days before really seeing how their reactions affected the polls. Almost widespread disapproval of how Trump is handling things, and a sense that in a time of crisis, Hillary comes across poised, controlled, and confident, and he comes across like in a time of crisis he'll just get even crazier. There isn't a
Well,
grand. So go on.
well, now I would say two things about that. I would say number one, um, politically speaking, this is not a national election. This is it's not a national election in the sense that what matters is winning states, not popular vote nationally. And so I would be willing to bet if you were to look at places that Trump needs to win, Pennsylvania, Michigan, he might come out better from this ordeal than you would think if you were just looking at national media or national numbers. The other point I would make is obviously that this story has not been as much about radical Islamism and terror as it might have been. I think the media has also focused, as they want to do, on the gun issue, and also there's also the gay issue, of course, is part of this. So it's a complicated story.
Well, the
And
latter part is more
interestingly,
surprising to me. I mean, the gun issue. I know gun rights folks don't like to look at it this way, but it's not some sort of side thing that an American with ISIS sympathies has access to guns and uses them in a terrorist attack. I mean, that is part and parcel of the story. I think it is more interesting that, I mean, his stated reason for the attack was on behalf of not just ISIS, but also Al Nusra and other terrorist organizations who are anti-ISIS. So you have this very convoluted mishmash of radical Islamic view coming from him. The gay part of it is coming through, additional reporting that is not connected to what he actually said,
right.
and that is becoming, roughly equivalent in the discussion. So, that to me is a more surprising element here.
Yeah, and then the so So my point being, I think if it was clearly like the Paris attack, if it had been clearly a case of radical Islamism being what this narrative was, I think that helps Trump more than if it's muddy and it's about guns and about Islam and about, um, closeted, potentially closeted gays, or whatever it is. And then we saw the Anderson Cooper interviewing Pam Bondi, the Attorney General of Florida. So I think that it's a less clear cut issue to help Trump. Interestingly, though, the two side issues, or maybe not even side issues, but the two other issues that I mentioned, guns and gays, are issues where Trump is pivoting. He tweeted, as we tape this, he tweeted this morning about meeting with the NRA, about having, maintaining, supporting, presumably about his supporting a list, a terror watch list of people who could not purchase guns if they were on it. This does not comport with conservative orthodoxy, and there are stories about Trump being the most pro-gay Republican nominee of all time, and he is tweeting out things to suggest that. So it's really an interesting time right now, obviously with tragedy as the backdrop of it. But the politics is definitely something worth noting.
Now, not that Trump has ever been one to be consistent on the issues, but he had previously said that he believed we should ban gun purchase for people on the terrorist watch list. So he is sticking with that. I mean, so he tweeted he was going to meet with the NRA to talk about this issue, which would seem to suggest he's going to try to woo them over to his side. And you also had, I forgive me that I haven't looked at the specifics of the comments, so there might be nuances here, but both Mitch McConnell and Senator Rob Portman made some indication that they would support some version of that. Although I believe McConnell's version of it was not Democratic friendly, but I didn't have a chance to read the specifics.
I think we've talked about this before because there's sort of elite bipartisan consensus that this list is a bad idea because it's secret.
I do not accept that premise.
Okay, maybe there's not consensus. There certainly are prominent conservatives and liberals.
Yeah, that I would agree with.
Who have said that this list is problematic because it's secretive. You don't know that you're on it. There's really no way to get off it that we know of. And people who have gotten put on the no-fly list, for like reasons that sort of boggle the mind, have they face the same problems. And so if you're a small government conservative who is very skeptical about government, depriving our constitutional rights, you might have a problem with this. And obviously, if you're a sort of an adamant activist or defender of the Second Amendment, you might also see this as just another stepping stone toward registration, confiscation, or wherever that may lead.
Now, I'm going to forcefully rebut some of that, okay?
Okay.
Well, just politically, let's keep in mind now, Democrats, when it comes to gun control, always try to find a more narrow position that they think will be politically palatable because they know a very broad gun control view will get a lot of backlash, particularly in key swing states. So for a long time, it was assault weapons ban. We're not saying ban handguns. Most people don't have assault weapons. This is a very narrow slice of the guns that are out there, but people don't need to have military weaponry to go hunting. So that was considered kind of narrow. They got away with that for a long time in the 90s, but once that expired in 2004, I believe, first Bush term, they haven't been able to get a lot of mileage out of it, even though they still hold a position by and large, but they haven't been able to get very far with it. So now the Democrats have gone even narrower. If you're on the terrorist watch list, you're on the no-fly list, you shouldn't get a gun. I mean, this is an even smaller pool of people. And they're actually, again, now, I mean, they didn't get a lot of mileage out of that after San Bernardino when they first were pushing that point. They seem to be getting a little bit more mileage out of it today. Now, when that came up in December, you did get some criticism from the left and the right on the grounds that you were saying. But the facts here have been grossly distorted. And I wrote about this in December for Real Clear Politics. So I'm gonna quote myself, and forgive me if the numbers have changed slightly in the past 6 months, but I would imagine not dramatically so. Charles C.W. Cook at the National Review at the time gave the common libertarian talking point. There are almost 1 million names on the watch list. Nearly, there's two lists here. There's a terrorist watch list and there's a no-fly list. They're different. Talking about the watch list. There are almost 1 million names on that list, and 300,000 of which are linked to no terrorist groups at all. That's misleading because there are 1 million names on the list globally. There are only 25,000 names on the list that are Americans or American citizens or legal residents. The no-fly list.
Damn Charles C.W. Cook.
The no-fly list, people will say that has 47,000 names, but again, that's global. Only 800 names on the no-fly list are American. So this is a really small group of people that we're talking about here. So the question, so some people say, Ted Kennedy got on the no-fly list, but of course that was a minor glitch in its early stages, and he was removed.
Stephen Hayes, Weekly Standard.
Right,
Cat Stevens.
Another case. Also,
the great Cat
Stevens.
Yusuf Islam cannot get on an airplane, apparently.
So then the people say, well, these are prominent people. They can get off. The average person can't get off. Omar Mateen got off the watch list. He was on the list in 2013 and 2014 because he made some incendiary comment at work. The FBI investigated, said there wasn't enough evidence there, and they took him off the list. So it is not the case. This is some massive catch-all that all of America is going to get put on for spurious reasons. Now, maybe, for what I know right now, obviously it would be better if he stayed on the list, but you can't blame the FBI for checking it out and making their best reasoned judgment.
No,
I think, look,
there. I remember, a dozen years ago, my dad, who, was a hardcore conservative Rush Limbaugh listener, telling me, well, we need to, that we need to have, the airport security. The Department of Homeland Security and all that stuff. And I think this fits into a similar category. I think this is probably smart politics. And I think that even though it goes against, conservative, small government, conservative orthodoxy, I think it's probably smart politics. And I think that Trump, this is an example of him being liberated from that the fact that his ideological flexibility allows him to adopt these positions which sound like common sense. Now, the problem with conservatism politically is that so much of it is about unintended consequences and slippery slopes and long-term ramifications, and that's a different issue. But if we're just talking about what is the smart political move right now, Trump is probably doing it, and because he's not tied, festooned. He's not. He doesn't have the baggage of trying to defend a coherent political worldview.
But it's a position I agree with. I think this should be a consensus position. If you want to argue there shouldn't be watch lists and there shouldn't be no-fly lists, and have a purist libertarian anti-security state position, I think that's a intellectually coherent position to have. I think it is a position that is going to mean you will probably suffer more terrorist attacks in the future. There's an argument that hey, people are gonna get attacked. It's governments can't stop everything. Stiff upper lip.
Right. Well, and I think that's true. I mean, I think that I think the truth is that there's no way that we can prevent these horrible things from happening. And you could argue that then the question is, do we give up our civil liberties?
Right. I mean, I agree. You'll never get to zero. You'll never stop every lone wolf. It's impossible. But there is an argument that you should do as much as you can to stop as many as you can, within the bounds of the Constitution, and to have a list that is based on reasonable suspicion. It is not just, that's not racial profiling. It's not just I Googled Al Qaeda today and now I'm on a watch list. I mean, obviously that would be too broad. But these lists, you can see by the numbers, they're not that broad. There's plenty of people who Google Al Qaeda. I've Googled Al Qaeda things before. I'm not on the watch list. I'm allowed to go on planes. So I don't think that's not the situation that we're in. But if you want to argue that just in principle it's bad, that's a perfectly fine position to have. If you're going to have a watch list, if you agree there should be a watch list and you agree there should be no fly list, then it makes no sense at all to have the list and allow people to buy weapons if you're on the list. That's totally incoherent. No,
I hear you. I hear you, and I think that there are sort of crazy things that people. And aren't there inconsistencies where people who are on the list can't do A, but they can do B? You know what I'm saying? They can't go to a movie, but they can get on a plane or something. Something like ridiculous.
I mean, the watch list, I believe, is just that. I don't think you lose anything being on the watch list. It means you're being watched. There's reason. You said something about liking Hezbollah at work, and it was reported. So FBI said, well, maybe you're with Hezbollah. I need to go check that out. I'm going to watch you. That's a legitimate thing to do. It doesn't. You can be on the watch list and still fly. You're not. No fly list is really, really tight. But I think if you're under some reasonable suspicion, and it doesn't take that long to go buy a gun and go shoot people, like that's a good line to draw and say, hey, you can't go buy a gun right now. We're checking you out. We have reasonable suspicion to check you out, and so you got to hold off before you get a gun today. Doesn't mean you use it forever. If you want, maybe there should be some expedited review process if you want to buy a gun, and then you get to make sure everything's all free and clear. You can make that argument, but. In the midst of the investigation, maybe you should not get to go to Walmart and buy an assault rifle.
Let me go broad and then I'll go narrow. So broadly speaking, I would just say I think this is another example of how it's like really tough to be a conservative, because you're constantly fighting a defensive war, whether it's changing social mores or the fact that these things are not going to stop, and that every time one of these tragedies occurs, it's going to, weaken the resolve of people who are prioritizing civil liberties and, defending the Second Amendment over protection and security. And so, like how many of these is it going to take? Look, something horrible happens and then the public says never miss an opportunity, or the politicians say don't miss an opportunity, never let a crisis go to waste, right? And then it turns out the public doesn't want to take away guns. The public actually wants more guns, and then something else bad happens. Like you presumably, like at some point when these things happen, they're not happening sort of in a vacuum. They're happening and they're being broadcast on national TV ad nauseum. So maybe in the old days it would have happened. It would be in a more or less in a local market. These things we're inundated with it. All the commentary, or almost all of the commentary, suggests that the common sense solution is to ban guns. And some sort of it's usually couched in an incremental way, something that sounds like common sense today.
Well, I mean, for a conservative, you have two fundamental principles that are in conflict here.
Right.
There are plenty of conservatives want to go, all out to stop radical Islamic terrorism. I mean, we all hear every day that how dare Democrats not use the phrase radical Islam? This is the absolute worst thing in the universe. It needs to be called out by name, and we have to do everything we can to stop it. But we also believe that people should get to buy guns whenever they want to, and if that includes people who are suspected of being terrorists, that puts those two positions in some direct conflict. So that's got to be uncomfortable. And Trump is not allowing himself to be caught in that. He's putting one issue, giving it precedence over the other.
Yeah, but I think this is very consistent with his sort of strongman, authoritarian.
He's not a libertarian.
We're going to crack down. We're going to crack. Look, he's positioned himself. He's branded himself as someone who's going to be daddy, keep us safe, and he's not afraid to use big government, the powers of the executive branch or whatever, to do it. And so I think this is on message for him. I think this is actually, and it's smart politics for the reasons we've already described, but I think it's also it's consistent with his brand.
If it breaks the Republican coalition, is it smart politics? I mean, I think it's the right position on the merits. I think he has to pivot to the middle on something. But here's an issue that really splits the right, and he's already suffering leakage on his right. I mean, Hillary, I think, is finding a way in her rhetoric to be more elegant how she leans rightward on certain things without angering. Bernie didn't get mad at Hillary last week when she suggested America is an exceptional country and is indispensable on the global national security stage. He didn't shake his fist at that, so she got away with that kind of two-step. Is Trump going to get away with this, or is he going to get pummeled by the NRA and the libertarian right?
Well, I think if we've learned anything, that the Republican Party is split, and that Trump doesn't care, and that they're pretty much that the Republican establishment and the conservative movement is essentially impotent. And so I think this is the smart political play, and I think it's on brand. So I think he's, let's just put aside, ideology here. I think this makes perfect sense from Trump's standpoint. And I don't think he gives a damn what the Republican or the conservatives think about this. And frankly, I don't know that he should, unless you actually have strong philosophical beliefs, which he doesn't. Then I don't see why he would care what, the base. Well, it's not even the base. The base is with him. This is not the. So I don't think he should care what these groups think. What is the NRA going to go support Hillary Clinton?
Well, they can support Gary Johnson, right?
I don't know. I'd love to see where Gary Johnson's at on this issue. He's also not necessarily orthodox in terms of his libertarian ideology, but he may be solid on guns. I'm not sure that he is. I'd like to know. I'm curious. I'm Johnson curious. I heard. I'm a big fan of the podcasts, Bill, and Glenn Thrush. I don't know if you know this. Has got a really good Politico podcast that I would highly recommend. And I was listening to one from a few weeks ago that he had Gary Johnson on, and I like Gary Johnson. This is a guy who climbed Mount Everest. He's an athlete. He's not a stranger from taking a toke. Actually, I don't know if he actually smokes weed, but he may
I think he does. Although
edibles.
he said on Samantha Bee that he made a pledge that he wouldn't smoke marijuana while president. So the clarification is that he doesn't.
When he said he didn't during the Glenn Thrush podcast, I think he said he didn't during his 8 years as governor of New Mexico. Right. I'm interested in Gary Johnson. I'll tell you what turns me off is when
before you launch into that, Matt, I do want to talk to you, but he did an interview with Reason.com, the libertarian website, yesterday.
I didn't know that.
And he said, quote, "I understand how so many people can believe that if you restrict this kind of weapon, you can prevent this kind of incident, but there's just no evidence whatsoever to suggest that it makes us any safer. In fact, restricting guns makes things less safe. That's the camp I'm in." So,
okay. So I'm
the
getting
could go his way.
Gary Johnson is pulling me, his tractor beam is very slowly pulling me into his orbit. I mean, before I listened to this Glenn Thrush interview, I would not have really considered him. You know, it turns me off when he talks about being a social liberal and a fiscal conservative.
Right.
I don't think that's the definition of libertarianism, number one. I think that's kind of erroneous, but not that I'm the expert on that. But I'm not a social liberal. I mean, I don't define myself as a social conservative, and you know, like I don't care about, you know, marijuana or anything like that. But I think I'm a culture. I mean, I'm to a certain degree a traditionalist, a cultural conservative. I mean, like I believe in family values. Doesn't mean I'm a saint, but I don't like the social liberal thing. That turns me off to him. But the more I heard him talk about this sort of Zen-like quality, which, you know, what athletics has meant to him, running marathons, climbing Mount Everest. He started off as a handyman, you know, sort of. You know, working as like a carpenter and making money. You got to go listen to this podcast. But I actually found myself, you know, kind of admiring him, and I'm giving him a chance now for the first time. And it's not because he's perfect, because none of them are going to be perfect, but that he would be, you know, if I think of like, are any of these candidates perfect? I honestly couldn't vote for any of them. But if it's like, who do I like and trust the most? Gary Johnson, Hillary Clinton, or Donald Trump? Then Gary Johnson comes out looking a lot better.
I mean, I would think if you are an economic conservative,
which I am,
Gary Johnson holds a lot of appeal. I mean, he's the most economically conservative person in the race, you know, particularly on trade. If you're a national security conservative, you know, Johnson is akin to Trump, with more isolationist leanings. You know, even more so than Trump. You know, Trump is militaristic when it comes to ISIS. But Hillary Clinton's going to be tempting to you because she has exhibited the most hawkish tendencies of the three.
Well, Johnson's also, I mean, and you know, just based listening to this podcast, he's pro-immigration. I mean, as governor of New Mexico, he doesn't see a huge problem with Hispanic
but there's no candidate that really appeals to the social conservative of the three.
I know, that's the problem. That's the problem, and that's, you know, and that's the, you know, that's the obvious. Not that I mean, I heard Hillary Clinton give that really great foreign policy speech the other week, and I'm telling you, man, this Marco Rubio, Jeb Bush, they could have, as you've mentioned, I mean, they could have delivered this speech. I mean, she talked about American exceptionalism. A lot of it really rang. I mean, it pushed a lot of buttons that I like to have pushed, and the opposite of Trump. But I could never vote for her because of the life issue and because of the Supreme Court.
Doesn't disqualify Gary Johnson?
It does. That's why I said I couldn't. If I'm voting for who I like the best, I couldn't vote for him. If it's these are your three options, who's the best of these three? Hillary, Trump, or Gary Johnson. That's when I'll put it this way.
You need to be consistent here. If Hillary is disqualified for you on the basis of abortion, how can Johnson be a possibility for you?
Well, what kind of judges will he appoint, and will he be an activist on the issue? But look, you raise a legitimate. I mean, this is why I have not yet written the why I'm voting for a Gary Johnson piece, and I probably won't get to that point because this probably will be a deal breaker.
You've given yourself an out though, because you could argue with Johnson that's at least a possibility that you would name a judge that would not uphold Roe v. Wade and at least kick it to the state. So you could give yourself a rationalization there.
I mean, I'm looking into Gary Johnson right now, which is a big step. I thought he was I thought it was a joke before. And here's the other thing, too. I mean, obviously, Gary Johnson's not going to be the president. And so, in a way, it's a protest vote. And so that doesn't absolve me from the responsibility of considering such things. But it is what it is.
Well, I argued before that, I wrote a piece about how Nader, Nader is to blame, at least one of the factors to blame for why Bush got elected in 2000. And, and the defense of Nader always is, it's Gore's fault for not getting my vote.
Right.
He doesn't have ownership over my vote. I mean, that's true. But as a voter, you have responsibility to be aware of the political system that you are in. You are in a political system that does not have a runoff. Within your state, it's first past the post, plurality winner gets all the electoral votes. You are responsible for knowing that and knowing the potential consequence of what your vote may bring. If you think Al Gore was as bad or worse than George Bush, yeah, you have no obligation to vote for him. But if you did think that George Bush was uniquely bad and you did not vote for Al Gore, then that is your fault. Well, I
think that's a great point. And first of all, if Rand Paul had run as a libertarian candidate, I wonder how things might have turned. I think I would be wholeheartedly supporting him right now, and a lot of other people who were pretty skeptical of Rand Paul might now be in his camp if he had run as a libertarian candidate. But look, I think if any generic Republican were the nominee, Al Gore was the vice president. He wasn't perfect if you're a liberal, but he was a generic Democrat. I mean, if there was if Bobby Jindal or Dick Cheney or whoever were the nominee right now, then I would think that the analogy with Al Gore would be more pertinent. But it's apples and oranges. Donald Trump is not a normal candidate.
Now, I just want to tease this because the piece that I've written has not been published yet, but I have a piece that's being looked at by Politico now about both Green Jill Stein and Libertarian Gary Johnson. I talked to both of them. I don't want to reveal all that was said in the interviews because I want to wait for the piece to come out. But one thing I want to tease here is we don't know what polls that the debate commission is going to use to decide who gets in the debates. We know that the Commission on Presidential Debates says you need to have 15% in an average of 5 polls. And we don't know which 5 they're going to use yet. Although last time it was NBC Wall Street Journal, ABC Washington Post, CBS New York Times, Fox News, and Gallup. And to my knowledge, and Gallup consults with the commission, but Gallup, to my knowledge, hasn't even polled the race yet this time. They did a terrible job in 2012. And they had a big mea culpa, and they haven't gone back into the field on it yet. But the other thing that we don't know is, are they going to use 3-way polls or 4-way polls to determine who gets 15%? And Gary Johnson right now in 3-way polls is peaking at 12. So he's got a shot at getting to 15. But when it's a 4-way, when you include Jill Stein, his number goes down. It goes below 10. So there's a huge uncertainty how this is going to be gauged. And how likely it is that you're going to get a Gary Johnson. I mean, Gary Johnson's got a better shot at getting on the stage than Jill Stein does. But that might, your presumption now is that this is definitely a throwaway vote, a protest vote. So I don't have to be as careful with what I do. But if he gets into the debate, who knows? Who knows where his number goes after that?
Well, I don't think he can win, but he could throw the race to Hillary or Trump. It's not clear to me. He may take more votes away from Hillary than anybody would imagine.
Well,
he may appeal to the Bernie Sanders voter more than people would imagine.
In the 3-way polls so far, he's been drawing evenly.
Yeah. The other thing that it does is just look. I think it also just changes the dynamic of a debate. You don't get the head-to-head, one-on-one confrontation And maybe that helps Trump. He certainly benefited from the multi-candidate debates in the Republican primary.
Right. So I mean, if he got on the stage and Jill Stein didn't, he would potentially draw evenly in the general because he can reach out to the Bernie left on drug legalization and foreign policy, play up the social liberalism. If it's a four-way, then Jill Stein's bringing up all the right-wing stuff in the Gary Johnson repertoire, and he starts pulling more from Trump than Hillary, but Jill Stein pulls more from Hillary than Trump. And so the net effect of the two being in there has generally shown a bigger loss for Hillary net.
So if you're really afraid that Donald Trump could become president, and you're, bad news, because there's weird scenarios where anything could happen.
What we don't know exactly is, we don't know what polls the commission's going to use. We also don't even know if Trump's going to show up to a debate. They might not even be debates, or maybe
I heard
Johnson.
I heard I think it was Glenn Thrush. I hate to keep promoting this guy, but check him out. I think it was Glenn Thrush told somebody that he thinks Trump just does one debate.
I mean, that could be the case. Let's say Johnson
he just
got
does
to 15,
one,
and he got an invite, and Trump didn't show up. Maybe Clinton debates Johnson, and you have like a Reagan-John Anderson thing all over again. Who knows what could happen here? But we also don't know exactly how many ballots they're going to get on. Johnson last time was on 48, and Jill was on, I believe, 36. Memory serves. But she is saying they're expecting to get up to at least 47. And I talked to Richard Winger at Ballot Access News, who tracks these things, and he thinks they'll get to 47 also. So they would then be at rough parity with the Libertarians, and that might be pressure on the commission. Hey, you really got to pull four-way here. They're both on the same number of ballots. You can't disrespect Jill Stein. So there's a lot of uncertainty. What kind of race we're actually looking at in the fall.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, and I think that Trump's, for all the serious, obviously potential consequences of a Trump presidency, he questions all the assumptions, and the fact that we outsource to some commission these debates, that's not the art of the deal. I don't think Trump just accepts their ground rules. Maybe there only needs to be one debate. So it'll be fascinating to watch. And look, I'm going to keep an eye on Gary Johnson. Let me just throw this out. Hey, Gary, why should I become, full on Gary Johnson guy? Make the argument for this.
I don't think it would be hard for you to get Gary Johnson on your podcast.
Well, I did hear him, that Glenn Thrush podcast. He said that he was one of the lessons he learned from running last time is to not do shows where it's just some guy in his pajamas in the basement. So he may not want to come on my show, but we'll see.
All I can say is I got an interview with him, so if I can, I think you can.
All right. Well, put in a good word, and we'll see what happens there. But I'm open, I'm curious, and I'm on the fence. So, I want. What's it going to take for me to drive out of here in this new Buick today? Is what I'm saying. Make me an offer I can't refuse.
We should leave it on that cliffhanger note. What will Matt Lewis do next?
All right, and if you want to hear,
will win Matt Lewis's heart. Find out next week on the DMZ.
And if you want to hear more of Bill Scher talking about threesomes and foursomes, download this podcast on iTunes. Check us out on Twitter at DMZ Show, and tell your friends. Tell your friends about the DMZ. So, another excellent award-winning show, Bill Scher.
Thank you, and we'll talk next week.
Got